The hum of Ouagadougou International Airport buzzed steadily in the evening air. Bright screens flickered flight information across vast glass panels. Travelers in business suits hurried by, dragging leather suitcases behind them. In a quiet corner of Gate 7, a man waited alone, dressed simply. A clean white linen shirt, worn travel shoes, and a dark jacket slung over one shoulder. President Ibrahim Traoré stood unnoticed among the crowd. No security detail, no flags, no visible sign of his station, just another man among many, traveling under a simple name to avoid attention. It was deliberate. Ibrahim had long believed that true leadership demanded understanding the world from the ground up, not from behind tinted windows and marble walls. His boarding pass read Seat 2A, Business Class, Flight DQ-207, bound for Dakar. As the boarding announcement crackled over the speakers, Ibrahim moved forward in line. His manner was quiet, courteous. He carried a single canvas bag. No assistant, no fanfare. At the gate, a young flight attendant named Marie glanced up at him. Her brow furrowed slightly as she scanned his ticket. "Business class?" she repeated, her voice just a little sharper than necessary. "Yes," Ibrahim said calmly. Marie hesitated. Behind her, a tall man in a sleek navy suit tapped his foot impatiently, glancing at his watch. He leaned in and whispered something to Marie. She nodded stiffly. "I'm sorry, sir," Marie said, voice tight. "There's been a seating adjustment. Would you mind stepping aside for a moment?" Ibrahim simply nodded and moved to the side, stepping away from the line without a word. He watched as others continued boarding without issue. The man in the navy suit, and clearly a foreign businessman, was ushered past him with a smile. Minutes passed. Finally, Marie returned, avoiding his gaze. "Sir, we've had an unexpected situation. I'm afraid we'll need to reassign your seat. Economy class." A few passengers nearby glanced over, sensing something unusual. Ibrahim's eyes remained steady. "May I ask why?" Marie stiffened. "Priority seating. Higher-tier passengers," she muttered. A lesser man might have argued, raised his voice, flashed credentials, demanded respect. Ibrahim simply inclined his head. "I understand." He accepted the new boarding pass without another word, slinging his bag back over his shoulder and stepping into the economy line. Behind him, Marie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The man was unnervingly composed. As Ibrahim moved down the narrow aisle toward the back of the plane, a few curious passengers stared. Here was a man who did not belong in the cramped, crowded rows of 26D. Yet he walked without complaint, without anger. As he settled into the tight middle seat, a place usually avoided at all costs, the plane continued boarding. An elderly woman with a heavy shawl sat to his right. A tired student burdened with textbooks sat to his left. Neither recognized him. Neither knew that the man between them carried the hopes of a nation in his heart. From the corner of the economy cabin, one of the junior flight attendants, Aminata, watched the scene unfold, her heart sinking. She knew exactly who this man was. She had seen him before, once at a hospital, visiting wounded soldiers quietly without cameras, once at a small farming village, lifting sacks of grain on his back alongside local workers, her hands clenched at her sides. It was a mistake, a terrible one. But by the time she gathered the courage to whisper it to her supervisor, the doors were closed. The engines roared to life, and Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, sat quietly in 26D, wedged between strangers, with no space to stretch, no recognition, and no dignity offered. He sat silently, because Ibrahim understood something they did not. Power was not in a seat number. Power was in how one carried themselves when the world tried to strip it away. And tonight, the world was about to learn exactly who they had underestimated. The plane hummed as it taxied along the tarmac, golden lights blinking past the small oval windows. Inside, passengers shifted impatiently, fastening seatbelts, adjusting carry-ons, flipping through in-flight magazines. Ibrahim Traoré remained still, his posture composed, his face calm, even as the cramped seat pressed uncomfortably against his shoulders. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff." Aminata moved slowly through the cabin, checking seatbelts, offering polite smiles, but inside her stomach twisted with guilt. She had already whispered to her supervisor, a thin, nervous man named Jules, about the mistake, about who 26D really was. He had shrugged. "Just another politician," Jules muttered dismissively. He's flying economy, let him. Our VIPs are up front where they belong. Aminata swallowed hard. She knew the difference between a politician and a leader. Ibrahim Traoré didn't use titles to demand power. He embodied it. In seat 2A, the foreign businessman who had bumped Ibrahim sipped his wine, already relaxed. His laptop glowed with spreadsheets and aggressive bar graphs. He had no idea he had just taken the President of Burkina Faso's seat. At cruising altitude, dinner service began. Economy class trays rattled down the narrow aisles. Dry chicken, tiny cups of water, packets of crackers. Ibrahim accepted his meal with a small nod of thanks. When the elderly woman beside him struggled to open her water bottle, he wordlessly took it, twisted off the cap, and handed it back with a smile. She patted his hand gratefully. At the front of the plane, the businessman barked at a flight attendant to warm up his meal again. Aminata clenched her jaw. This wasn't right. Halfway through the flight, turbulence rattled the plane. Overhead compartments trembled. People gasped. Drinks spilled. As the plane steadied, a call light blinked in row 2. The businessman, Mark, another attendant, hurried forward. "Yes, sir? I demand a seat change," the man barked. "The turbulence is worse back here. Move someone. Move anyone." Mark hesitated. "Sir, the flight is full." "Figure it out," the businessman snapped. Mark conferred briefly with Jules. Jules scanned the manifest, his eyes narrowing. "Move the guy in 26D, he said casually. "He looks like he can handle economy." Mark blinked. "But do it," Jules said sharply. Aminata froze. This was worse than before. Now they wanted to displace him again. Her heart pounded. She stepped forward. "Sir," she said quietly to Jules, "you can't do this. You don't understand who he is." Jules sneered. "I don't care if he's the mayor of Timbuktu. He's not priority." Before Aminata could respond, Mark was already weaving his way back down the aisle toward row 26. Ibrahim looked up calmly as Mark approached. "I'm sorry, sir," Mark said, clearing his throat. "There's been another adjustment. We'd like you to move." Passengers nearby turned to look. Whispers rose. Aminata gripped the seat in front of her so hard, her knuckles whitened. Ibrahim stood slowly. He said nothing. Mark motioned toward the rear of the plane, a small folding jump seat near the lavatories. The least dignified seat on any aircraft. Ibrahim picked up his bag, walked down the aisle. The murmur of voices followed him, some confused, some amused. Aminata felt her throat close up, but as Ibrahim passed her, he paused, ever so briefly. Their eyes met. In that moment, without a single word, Aminata understood. He wasn't humiliated. He wasn't broken. He was choosing to bear this indignity silently, with strength, for a reason, for a lesson, and it was not for himself. He settled into the cramped jump seat. Around him, the plane buzzed back to normalcy. The businessman in 2A reclined his seat with a satisfied sigh. But what no one in that cabin realized, not Jules, not Mark, not the first-class elite sipping champagne, was that Ibrahim Traoré was not a man whose value diminished when stripped of title or luxury. He was about to remind the world that real leadership could not be boarded, reassigned, or hidden behind class curtains. And before the wheels touched down, the flight crew, and soon the entire country, would know exactly who had been sitting quietly among them. The hours dragged on as Flight 207 sliced through the night sky. In first class, laughter echoed as champagne flowed. In economy, Ibrahim Traoré sat wedged into the cramped jump seat near the lavatories, a place normally reserved for crew during emergencies, never for paying passengers, certainly never for a head of state. But Ibrahim was not thinking about dignity lost. He was thinking about dignity revealed. Aminata hovered nearby, checking on passengers. Her heart ached with every glance toward him. But she understood now. Ibrahim didn't need rescue. He needed witnesses. Because the truth was about to land harder than any turbulence. It began quietly. An older man, an American judging by his baseball cap and sneakers, shuffled down the aisle toward the bathroom. As he passed, he double-took at Ibrahim, then froze. His mouth opened slightly in recognition. "Aren't you—" he started, voice uncertain. Ibrahim simply smiled, raised a finger to his lips. The man blinked. His eyes widened. Without a word, he hurried back up the aisle, whispering fiercely to his wife, who pulled out her phone and began scrolling with urgency. The whisper spread like fire. Passengers leaning across aisles, phones out, hushed voices rising. Aminata caught snippets. President of Burkina Faso. Why is he back there? Is this for real? Jules, oblivious, sipped coffee in the galley, complaining to Mark about staffing hours. Mark glanced nervously toward the back, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Too late, because the internet had found them. Someone posted a picture of Ibrahim squeezed into the jump seat with the caption, "This man was moved out of first class. You won't believe who he really is." In under 15 minutes, the photo rocketed through social media. Journalists picked it up. Activists amplified it. Diplomats called their aides in disbelief. By the time the seatbelt sign dinged for landing, the pilot received a direct message from the airline's executive desk. Urgent. Confirm presence of President Ibrahim Traoré on Flight 207. The pilot's blood drained from his face. He called Mark to the cockpit immediately. Passengers buzzed with rising outrage. Whispers turned into muttered protests. What's he doing back there? Why wasn't he treated properly? This is a disgrace. As the plane touched down, wheels kissing the tarmac, the damage was already done. Mark sprinted to the back of the plane, breathless. He bent down, almost kneeling in front of Ibrahim. "Sir," he stammered, "there's been a terrible mistake. Please, let us escort you properly. First off the plane, VIP arrival team." Ibrahim simply raised a hand. "No need," he said, voice steady. "I boarded like everyone else. I will leave like everyone else." The door opened. The jet bridge connected. First-class passengers shuffled off first, red-faced, avoiding his gaze. The businessman who had taken his seat ducked his head, pretending to fiddle with his jacket zipper. Pamela Carrington, who had demanded Ibrahim be moved, clutched her pearls, face stiff with horror, as she finally realized what had happened. Aminata stood frozen by the galley, tears welling. Ibrahim rose calmly from the jump seat, picked up his bag, and walked the aisle with the same quiet dignity he carried into the highest international summits. No fury, no theatrics, only grace. And as he passed Aminata, he paused. He gave her a slight bow, a small, meaningful acknowledgement. The entire cabin, passengers, attendants, even the co-pilot peeking out from the cockpit, fell into an uneasy, reverent silence. Step by step, Ibrahim Traoré exited Flight 207. And by the time his feet touched the polished floors of the arrival hall, the world outside already knew, because the headlines blazed across every screen. Airline humiliates President Ibrahim Traoré, a lesson in true leadership. The arrival hall at JFK Airport buzzed like a shaken hive. Ibrahim Traoré adjusted the strap of his worn leather bag across his shoulder and moved with quiet steps through the crowd. No entourage, no announcement, no demands. But even without saying a word, he was no longer invisible. Reporters clustered behind the glass walls of immigration, their phones raised, eyes wide. Airport security spoke urgently into radios. Cameras from arriving tourists whipped toward him, whispers spreading like ripples in a storm. "He's the president of Burkina Faso." "What's he doing alone?" "That's the guy from the flight photo." As Ibrahim approached the immigration desk, the agent on duty, a young man named Officer Blake, looked up and froze. For a full second, the air between them seemed to stop moving. "Sir," Blake said, clearing his throat, "on behalf of... well, I'm sorry for what happened." Ibrahim smiled gently and passed over his passport. "No apology needed," he said. "Sometimes the strongest lessons come wrapped in discomfort." Blake's hands trembled slightly as he stamped the passport, sliding it back respectfully with both palms. "Welcome to New York, Mr. President." The next hours blurred into history. The story exploded. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and dozens of news outlets ran the footage. Ibrahim, stoic in the back of the plane, the humiliation, the disregard, the dignity. Memes flooded Twitter. A photo of him in economy class, captioned, "Power is not where you sit, it's how you stand." A split image. Pamela Carrington glaring in first class, Ibrahim calmly smiling beside Eli. A quote from his airport interview, "Dignity doesn't wear designer labels." By noon, stock prices of the airline dropped by 12%. By 5 p.m., the CEO issued a shaky public apology. Too late, too hollow, at a hastily organized press conference. The airline spokesman, sweating under bright studio lights, mumbled about policy confusion and unfortunate optics. Not once did they say discrimination. Not once did they say racism. They still thought they could bury it. But the world was not in the mood to forget. Diplomatic calls rained down on the airline's headquarters. Several African nations announced immediate suspension of partnerships. Several major U.S. universities with rising African student populations pledged to cancel institutional travel accounts with the airline until action was taken. And underneath it all, ordinary people, the ones who watched Ibrahim Traoré walk that aisle with his head high, fueled the movement. The hashtag trended globally within 8 hours. Fly with dignity. Stand with Ibrahim. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of Manhattan, Ibrahim sat in a modest hotel room overlooking Central Park. No press, no advisors. Only his old friend and chief of staff, Maury, who paced the small sitting area furiously. "They humiliated you," Maury growled. "We should sue them, sanction them, destroy them." Ibrahim shook his head. "They destroyed themselves," he said, simply sipping tea. "And anyway, revenge is a poor use of dignity." Maury sighed heavily, flopping into the opposite chair. "But why didn't you announce yourself? Flash some title. Demand respect?" Ibrahim smiled faintly. "Because true respect isn't demanded," he said. "It is revealed, either by others or by their failure to give it." Maury sat in stunned silence. Across the city, the airline's board of directors convened an emergency midnight meeting. Before it even began, several of their largest corporate contracts, government, education, humanitarian, had already been canceled. Their future was slipping away not because of a lawsuit, but because they had violated something deeper, the invisible contract between dignity and humanity. 3 days later, a new story emerged, not one fed by Ibrahim or his staff, but by the boy, Eli Summers, the child Ibrahim had sat beside. Eli's foster mother, Denise, posted a video on Instagram. It showed Eli at school, holding up a crumpled boarding pass and saying in a clear, small voice, "I was scared. I thought maybe I wasn't supposed to sit there." But he smiled at me, and when they made him leave, I realized something. He didn't leave because he wasn't good enough. They made him leave because they were scared of how good he already was. The clip hit 5 million views in a day. Schools across America played it during assemblies. Human rights organizations reposted it. World leaders retweeted it. Ibrahim, sitting alone in his room, watched it on a battered laptop. A tear slipped down his cheek, not of sadness, but of hope. He closed the lid gently and whispered in his native Diula, "The seeds are growing." Weeks passed. The storm that began with one silent humiliation had grown into a global shift. Not chaos, clarity. Ibrahim Traoré had refused to retaliate with anger. He didn't grant interviews. He didn't make grandstanding speeches. Instead, he let his silence reveal the truth louder than any microphone. The airline that had removed him, Air Dominion, collapsed within 3 months. Not because of lawsuits, but because people stopped buying their tickets. Airports in Lagos, Accra, Dakar, and Nairobi canceled their partnerships. Top business schools uninvited Air Dominion recruiters. Major diplomatic events shifted to competitors. Pamela Carrington, once a socialite darling, withdrew from public life in disgrace after multiple audio clips surfaced. Her family's name, a fortress for generations, now carried the stench of arrogance and cruelty. Meanwhile, in a small but growing movement, something else rose. Not revenge, restoration. Inspired by what had happened, Ibrahim's allies in Burkina Faso proposed something new, a national aviation scholarship named after Eli Summers, to honor dignity, hope, and the unbreakable bond between generations. In Le Ciel pour tous, the sky for all. Funded quietly by private donors and Ibrahim himself. When asked about it at a rare press appearance, Ibrahim simply said, "We will not fly by pushing others down. We will soar by lifting each other up." The quote was printed on banners from Paris to Johannesburg. It became a song in classrooms. It became a mural in Ouagadougou, depicting a plane lifting not just passengers, but dreams. And then, something happened. No one saw coming. The International Aviation Federation, shamed by the scandal and eager to reform its battered image, reached out to Ibrahim. They offered him the keynote address at their global summit in Geneva, an unprecedented move, a chance to speak not just to one airline, but to the architects of the sky itself. Maury, pacing in their headquarters, was stunned. "You're going, right? This is your chance to tear down the system, Ibrahim." But Ibrahim only smiled gently. No, he said. It's my chance to rebuild it.